Welcome back to IGN at Gamescom Now. Joining me to discuss the Eternal Cylinder is Carlos Bordeaux of Ace Team. I got a chance to check this game out a little bit earlier today, and like your previous work, Zeno Clash is very visually distinct. So for folks at home, tell us, what is the Eternal Cylinder?
The Eternal Cylinder is like this survival game, but I don't want to throw you off too much with the concept of survival because it's very different. This is not a game where you're going to be chopping trees to gather resources and get some wood to build maybe a house, or it's a game about family, finding other little creatures and growing your family and finding mutations like by eating stuff which allow you to have these additional powers, and growing this family and having this adventure in this really surreal world. I think we've gone maybe beyond Zeno Clash in terms of the strangeness.
I don't know. I wouldn't go that far just yet. I was talking about that game earlier, and it's like a fever dream for me going.
Yeah, it is.
I remember it. So there's a titular element here, which is the Eternal Cylinder, which maybe we'll see, and I mean you'll know it when you see it. It's a little bit like the Never-Ending Story in the sense that it's just destroying absolutely everything in its path. We can see it dynamically breaking some stuff. There. Tell me about this protagonist.
So the Trebum are like the protagonists of the game. You get to play not only with one. That's the starting portion where you're basically learning the basics of the game. You're born into this world with this one single creature, born out of an egg. The cylinder's just coming and destroying everything, crushing everything in the world. But the Trebum are a group of several little creatures scattered around in this world, and they're born into this very hostile environment where there's predators, where there's other creatures, and there's this big mystery about where this cataclysmic event that the cylinder is. I don't want to spoil the origins or anything, but that is a thing that we're incorporating into the game. A story, it has survival games. You don't necessarily in all of them see like deep storylines, and we're trying to do a little bit of that for this title.
Yeah, I think with survival games, it's generally like emergent trying to make your own story, but I noticed there are very, very interestingly narrative bits kind of scattered into what is otherwise a procedurally generated world. So what we're seeing right now is an introduction that you handcrafted, but if you were to advance maybe 15 minutes from this, that would be procedurally generated, is that correct?
It's not entirely procedurally generated. It's still handcrafted mixed with procedural generation. We have like these segments of environments which we load into the game. So definitely each player gets to have their own experience, but we have like this artistry in the studio. We like doing our sort of handcrafted environments. So for instance, all the creatures are modeled to be their own thing, with their own behaviors, with their own designs. They work and behave in a way that isn't a part like of a procedural generation of creatures. That's a little bit the...
So we just saw the Trebum here have his first mutation. There was an egg that came by, he ingested it, and that caused him to mutate and sprout these legs that were able to have him jump over an otherwise insurmountable obstacle. Tell us about other mutations, tell us about the concept of progression, how it affects the family and what it's able to do.
Yeah, sure. So the Trebum, one of the core design aspects of the game is basically this notion that you are what you eat. So basically, at the beginning there in the tutorial, you're in this ditch, you can't jump out, you're just this little baby creature just born, and you need to get out with just jumping a little bit higher. So these jumping creatures, which you jump in, one lays an egg right there in the middle, you can grab it, you eat it, and you mutate, and bam, you get these hopper legs. You can acquire several types of different mutations which will change your body types, your eye types, your trunk, and they stack on. Like you can have a creature, for instance, that has a very mutated set of eyes or a mutated trunk, as well as legs, and this really brings to the game a lot of options. You can explore areas because of the certain mutations. For instance, you would go into this cold area and you cannot explore it because you're too cold, but you grow a layer of fur, so then you're warm, and then you can investigate that area.
Right. And it's not like you said several. I think several is an understatement. At least from what you showed me, there's a lot, and these elements in the environment aren't necessarily directly pointed out to you. Like sometimes you can go and explore things and be like, oh, this will mutate me. But I want to focus now on the cylinder because it is now glowing red hot, rolling towards our Trebhum here. What does this mean? How do we stop it? How do we get away from it?
Sure. So the game, at the beginning when we were working on the game, we had the cylinder constantly moving slowly in the environment. The people who will remember the 2015 sort of prototype that we had on YouTube on video, that was how it felt. But in the game, we wanted to have moments in which you pause the cylinder. So we have these anchor towers, which you have to activate to stop the cylinder. So the cylinder will go into this glowing red berserk mode. So it starts moving really fast, sort of mowing down the entire environment. So you have to reach these anchor towers, which have this like activation trigger at the bottom. And with that, you're able to sort of make sure the cylinder stops. Then you have areas in which you can safely explore, and you're not pressured by the cylinder, which needs to be constantly moving. We will have slow movement cylinder, also the cylinder moving fast. We want to have like a variety of of gameplay.
From what I played of it, it definitely felt, at least in the beginning, that there were these segments that kind of, once you advance past a certain point, you have to sprint, and everything that you just explored is now destroyed. And I think there's something really interesting narratively about that. I haven't seen this mutation. What is this, and can you talk about some of the enemy variety?
Yeah, sure. In that case, since it's a survival game, this is a body type that's like a blender sort of thing. It basically is the objects that you're eating, like the fruits and vegetables. It's processing them inside and generating a type of organic currency. So, like in the game, we have to think everything different. So you're not building things with wood. You're basically all the things that you're creating, you have to do it for this nomadic herd of little creatures. At this point, he's already gathered, he's with a buddy, so you're traveling in a group of 2, but you're going to start slowly growing your family, and you can apply these different mutations to the different creatures.
Gotcha. Talk to me about why it's important to have more than one Trebhum in your party. Can you control multiple ones, and is there some kind of team play eventually?
Sure. You can switch between them. So you basically you're assigning the leader, and the other ones will follow. And it's interesting because even though you can stack mutations on top of other mutations, there's a limit. For instance, if you have a specific trunk mutation, you acquire another trunk mutation, it will swap out one for the other.
Gotcha.
So having more Trebhum means that you have more options to have different powers at the same time. It also, they do cooperate in certain situations. For instance, you can shoot water like with a hose,
like an
spout like an elephant, and when you have several Trebhum, they will help you out. They will,
oh, really?
Yeah, they will shoot all at the same time. So, for instance, certain predators that are bothered by water, you can just spray them all together, and it makes it much more easy to fend them off.
So we just saw a great example of how these mutations affect where you're able to explore, how you're able to interact with the environment. The Trebhum were freezing to death, and this one was able to develop fur from something that it ate. What was interesting to me playing the demo was what you could eat, what you could not eat, what I was kind of driven to. How do you make those design choices? How do you facilitate players and kind of guide them to the right thing for them to be interacting with?
So in some cases, it's more obvious. We try to make it like a visual connection from what you're eating to what you were obtaining. Some cases, it isn't as obvious, and we enclose the player in a restricted area where the mutation is part of the puzzle that's being solved. So there is, for instance, if you remember from the trailer, the Trebhum would go, there was a square-shaped one that would go through a door which opened up. So that's inside this cave area, which is enclosed. You have the player in a controlled environment. So yeah, here for instance, an example where he's running around with several of his siblings, and you can get quite a large group.
Is there a maximum party size?
We still haven't defined that. We're actually still toying around with some of the design aspects of the game. This is still early. It's pre-alpha, so there's some aspects of the gameplay that we're still a little bit playing around with, and the party size is one of them.
So tell me about the enemies, starting with kind of the natural enemies, the enemies that are meant to exist in this world.
So for this game, we're creating an entirely alien fauna. So we have animals of all different sizes. We have like these gargantuan, huge sort of, we call them like, I'm using developer names because the actual names are super difficult to pronounce. But like these vacuum giraffes, like these huge giant monsters, so they have these mouths that open up and that they can sort of vacuum like these sandstorms. To these really, really small creatures, like these little balls that roll around. Like we're trying to have like a really big diversity of animals. They're all custom built for the different environments in the game. We have like an ice biome, we have a desert biome. It's not desert, it's a real desert. You arrive there and you're going to notice that it's not like an
I think anything
world.
You describe in this game can be described as surreal.
Yeah.
It just goes without saying that and speaking of, the enemy design is so out of this world. I just wonder, where do you draw this inspiration from?
Whoa, I mean, we have in the studio, Andres, Edmundo and I, the three brothers, the co-founders, we have like we all like a lot surrealism. We were maybe, we're from a home where my dad would leave books of Salvador Dali, Hieronymus Bosch, and painters. Also, the very early years of the video game industry in the 1980s, you would see some really, really strange stuff. So basically, I would say it's our love for those unconventional art styles that are maybe not that represented these days in
I would
normal,
say so.
yeah.
Certainly. What's happening here is we talked about that square.
Yeah,
and it's coming back, and this is an example of a more handcrafted element that's implanted into the world. So what's happening in this kind of
region? So as the structure of the game will be such as that you have some areas of the game which are handcrafted for specific missions and with specific objectives. And those are like hubs that will be interconnected by this open world, procedurally generated sort of survival gameplay where you're moving around from one place to the other, discovering mutations, growing your family, finding other trebum. But we do really feel that we need to add like these special events, and one of the strong reasons we're doing it is because the game has a story. This is not it has chapters, it has an antagonist, there is a reason why this is all happening, and we want to progress the player through that story of discovery of what's going on, what's happening to this world, in a way that exploration is not just for the sake of exploration itself and discovery, which can be really exciting. Survival games are really exciting to explore, but we also want the narrative aspect that we've done for other titles.
So I get the sense that the cylinder is not something that is necessarily organic to this world. So you see a lot of these creatures that look like they belong in this alien world. Then there are enemies that are kind of specific to the cylinder that look like they do not belong in this world. Can you tell me about those?
Okay, so the cylinder is not the cylinder by itself. It's it has these minions, these servants of the cylinder, which are some like really bizarre creatures that seem to have some resemblance to our world. So, for instance, we have this enemy which I call the Charger, which looks like a little bit like a truck with some arms, and they're really crazy because one of the things we had to do, which was differentiate the alien creatures from an alien world. So if we would have designed just simply another bizarre creature, you would go into the game and say, oh, look at that, that's just another animal from this world. So we have to set apart these servants of the cylinder as something that seems totally alien to this alien world. And that was quite a bit of a challenge in terms of design. But for those who've seen the trailer, you can see that there's some things that you say and like, this doesn't belong to that particular world. This seems to be from somewhere else.
We're running a little bit short on time, but I do want to ask about kind of gameplay mechanics and combat as it exists in this game. What are we looking at in terms of the action, the intense segments for these?
Yeah, action. I mean, this is not going to be a game where you kill a lot of stuff. The purpose is not to grow your family in order to run over the enemies.
It's not an army. Oh.
No, it's not an army.
Dang.
You're not going to shoot them or anything. But you do start acquiring mutations. For instance, you can get a trunk that shoots poison, so you sort of scare off the bigger predators. As you get a larger group, the predators start being more afraid of you, and you can avoid having them chase you. Another way is just leading them into the cylinder sometimes, and having them crushed. But there's actually bosses.
Yeah,
in the game,
there were, and they're pretty intricate.
Yeah.
When can we see more of it? Do you have a release date, or when's the next time we're going to see the next chapter?
I don't know when the next time we're going to see it, but it's a 2020 release. We don't have anything more specific, but the game's pre-alpha, but we're pretty happy where we are now with the game, and super excited about showing it for the first time here.
Carlos, I got to play it, and I have to say, I thought it was something pretty special. I think it's very unique in terms of the aesthetic, in terms of the mechanics, how the gameplay is weaved into the weird emergent narrative and the titular element, the eternal cylinder. Very, very cool. Thank you so much for joining me. Don't go anywhere at home. We've got a lot more Gamescom coming right up on IGN at Gamescom now, so stick around.